So welcome, my friend, to the On the Blue Line podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Mulder, and this is a law enforcement podcast where we discuss topics that will empower you on and off the job. Maybe you're tired, frustrated, feeling overworked, struggling to balance work and home life demands, or simply you need some encouragement. Well, then you've come to the right place. This is the 95th morning roll call and the 149th episode of the podcast. And thank you so much for all of you who've joined along in this journey. Today on the podcast, have you said I do to this year's goals? If this is your first time listening, welcome. We have two weekly podcasts. The one you're listening to right now, which is Morning Roll Call, comes out on Mondays, a weekly monologue show where you and I sit down and discuss news, recent events, maybe law enforcement trends, and a variety of other topics that's going to help you, give you something to consider as you begin your week. And the other show is called The Interview Room, and it comes out every Thursday. And in there, I sit down with guests from all walks of life that can offer us something beneficial in our personal lives. Last week, we had the second of our two-part holiday year-end special where there were 10 things that you can consider that were little nuggets of information from the podcast back in 2019 and 2020. So if you have not listened to the last two shows, the one that came out the week of Christmas and the one the week of New Year's, I encourage you to go back and do that. They released on Thursday of both weeks. And then this coming Thursday, we'll be back to our normal interview show, and I sit down with David Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence podcast. It's a great podcast. Dave's a great guy, has a fascinating story, and I think you're going to really enjoy that podcast, but that conversation in general. Just know that you can locate the podcast on pretty much whatever streaming service you're listening to, but it's also available on YouTube and Rumble in video, and you can always go to ontheblueline.com for more information. So let's get to today's show. I hope you had a wonderful holiday season and you and your family are having a great start to the new year. Hope you got to do something exciting and something memorable and took some time away from the job, because I know that this can be a very hectic time at work, and a lot of the calls and stuff that you can be responding to can be absolutely crazy. We have all been there and we've all seen that firsthand. So the normal episodes will be back at the end of January, as I've been talking about for a few weeks. So if you're new to this program, just know that this is a little bit different format, a little bit faster format, partially due to the fact that not only do I talk about law enforcement topics, and I have this show for law enforcement officers, but that is what I do as well, and that is my primary job right now. So when different things come up and I have to focus on those things, which is the case right now for an exam that I'm studying for, well, that becomes the priority. So because of that, this does fall a little bit behind, but we do have some things in the works that hopefully will change some of that, and some things we've got going on that's hopefully going to take some of the workload off of me, which is going to allow me to balance this a little bit better and get you more information and more topics faster, which is the goal, right? My goal is to build this thing out where eventually I'd love to actually have it grow to a daily show and change the format a little bit to something that I think you're really going to enjoy. So today I want to talk about, this is the first podcast of 2023. So I thought it was fitting, as I do from time to time, I talk about different subjects, about goals and habits. And why do I do that? Well, I do that because that is what I have to do. This is that time of year that I'm reflecting, that I'm looking back at the previous year, the previous even decade, because I like to keep it, within the context of a 10-year period. But then I'm also looking ahead. What's next? What am I going to do? And we've talked about a lot of different things when it comes to habits and goals and so forth. We've talked about it in previous years, this whole idea of resolutions, right? Where people are like, well, I'm going to resolve to do such and such. And then that is why the gyms are always crowded on day 1 of January, provided they're open, maybe day 2. And then by the end of the month, they're empty. It's because they resolved to do something they didn't stick to. The same can often be true when we just set goals, right? So There's a book that we actually have to read as part of an exam that I'm studying for, and I've talked about this book before, but it's called The Passion of Command, The Moral Imperative of Leadership by Colonel B.P. McCoy. If you are in the law enforcement profession, if you're a leader of people really in any profession, I highly encourage you to look up this book and read it. It's short, not a lot, as far as reading. You can read it in 2 hours, maybe. It may be faster. But the truths in here are going to help you when it comes to leading people. But something I wanted to draw attention to is when he's talking about this idea of discipline, right? So I'm just going to read a little bit from this here. But when the 1st Marine Division began preparations for deployment to Kuwait in what would have later been known as Operation Iraqi Freedom, our commanding general, Major General J.M. Mattis, gathered his battalion commanders and described his vision of success. Part of that vision was being brilliant at the basics, which if you've been in law enforcement, you've been in the military, you've heard that term before, and it's very true, right? Like those are the things that we practice, and we got to be brilliant at the basics. We got to be good at those things. He went on to emphasize the inherent difficulties, but that mastery of the basics was all it would take to whip anybody. As I contemplated the basics, I began to write them down in a bullet format. I realized that at the root of being brilliant at the basics was habituated discipline. Discipline is not necessarily instant obedience to orders, nor is it punishment to correct deficiencies. Rather, discipline is reinforced habit designed to produce a specific character, a pattern of behavior that is strong enough to override creature comforts, personal wants, and lapses in fortitude. In short, the habituated discipline we sought was a form of amicable discipline and self-control, a code of behavior generated from within. So, what does he mean by that? Well, habituated discipline means there's a habit formed, right? It becomes, this is what I'm going to do. So it's not just this abstract goal. It's rather, these are the building blocks. And of course, here they're talking about winning wars, but these are the building blocks that it requires for me to be good at my job. These are the things that I need to do. Here's my goal. This is what I want to do. I want to win conflicts, right? We want to do it as safely as possible. We want to, whatever it is in your environment. Well, in order to do that, there are certain basic things we have to do. In order to be good at those things, they have to become habits, right? So the discipline of doing that habit over and over again becomes habituated discipline. So I thought that was such a good reminder of the difference between just setting out big plans, big goals, big dreams, big visions for 2023 without concentrating on the little habits to get there. If your goal is, I want to lose 60 pounds, if your goal is, I want to be able to bench press 300 pounds, 400 pounds, whatever it is, if those are your goals, then you've got to reverse engineer it, break it down, but then the habits have to be put in place to get you there. Maybe you have spiritual goals. Maybe your goal is, I want to spend more time in prayer. Maybe you want to spend more time Bible reading, whatever your religion is. Whatever those goals are, we have to have the discipline of daily doing, hourly doing those habits. So then I came across, if you're not familiar with Art of Manliness in Brett McKay's work, I highly encourage you to check it out. He's also got a podcast, really, really good stuff. And I tell you, Brett is a super smart guy. But he sends out something called Sunday Firesides, which comes out every Sunday. They're small, they're digestible. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you can take a look at them for yourself and see if this is something that would be beneficial for you. But it just happened while I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today that I came across his. And he talks about, we tend to think of our goals as destinations, things to strive towards and then check off the list. Some goals are structured by this dynamic, but habits are not. The need to keep up with a habit isn't over in 28 days or 6 months or even a decade. It's never over. And I thought that was kind of profound in and of itself, right? It's true because we often think of, well, my goal is to lose 60 pounds, 50 pounds, whatever it is. But that isn't the long-term goal. That is actually the short-term goal. The long-term goal is to maintain that ideal weight. That I use that as an illustration because it's something we all can easily go with, but maybe it's something in the spiritual environment. Maybe it's in the relationship environment. Well, my goal is to spend more time with my wife, okay? Well, once you have quantified that and once you have set up what that looks like, That's not a goal that ever ends. And that is the problem we get ourselves into. And he goes on to say, habits get easier to sustain the more ingrained they become, yet their maintenance phase never expires. We are ever swimming against the current of entropy. As soon as we stop making the effort to move forward, we immediately begin drifting back. And we all know these times in our lives when that has very much been our situation, right? We set out, we have this goal, we have this plan for 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, 120 days. We are on top of it. And then at some point, we start to lose. And if we stop doing whatever the actions are that took us to get there, then we start sliding back. Why do I know this? Because I'm the poster child for it. That's how I know it. Because I have these same struggles. And I know if I have these struggles, you have these struggles. Because we're human. So he goes on, and I thought this was a really fascinating way to look at this. To remain where you end up, you have to keep doing exactly what it took to get you there, right? That's not earth-shattering. We all know that. Habit formation is thus less like taking a one-time project and more like committing to a lifelong marriage. And an arranged one at that. Choosing a new habit therefore requires more self-reflection than is typically lent. Do you really want to become the kind of person who does X, Y, or Z, or is it something simply you feel like you should do? Do you think you're a good match with this particular habit? Do you believe that this habit, you're going to love it and it's something that you're going to cultivate, like it's something that you want to do? Because if not, you're probably not going to hold on to it, not for the long term. I really found that thinking kind of helps me rethink a lot of the things that I do when I set out to, I want to do this plan, that plan, or another plan. So I had 3 ideas that I just wanted to give you real quick when it comes to starting a habit. So like he talks about, is this something you even want to do? I know for me, I sit down and I get ready for the new year, and I've talked about it before, and I journal, and I'm like, hey, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. Once I decide that, I have to be willing to put in the work for the long term. It's not like I'm just deciding to do something for a month and a half or 2 months. But historically, that's what I've done. And because of that, it inevitably fails. So I find myself at the next period of time, maybe it's around my birthday or around the year end, I'm talked about before, but I'm typically, around certain days on the calendar, I use those as reflection times. Well, in that moment, I'm like, oh, I'm not even doing that anymore, or I've completely reversed, or I've went backwards, or whatever the case may be. So some questions we have to ask ourselves is this something you even want to do? Or are you feeling pressured by some external force? Is there someone else that wants you to do this? Or is there like a guilt or a shame or something internal to yourself where you're like, I don't really want to do this. I just feel I have to. Maybe it's writing a book or losing weight or picking up a hobby or a side hustle or something like that, and you don't really want to do it. Well, that's where you got to start, because once you've made that commitment to do it, you've actually, with the situation of like writing a book, okay, that could have a definitive ending point. But if your goal is to be a writer, that doesn't have a definitive ending point. You have thus given yourself a lifetime of whatever it is. In order to get to that point, you're going to do that now forever, because the minute you stop that habit, you're no longer going to be reaching the goals, the plans, the dreams that you had. The second question I think we have to ask ourselves are you able to fully commit forever? Right? So I find this battle often for myself, because there's many things I want to do, need to do. They're on the list in many of the arenas I just mentioned, right? From relationships to the spiritual side to the physical side. So you have all these different goals, but there's only one of you and only 168 hours in a week to do it. So by the time you do the math, you have to get realistic that, you know what? I can't do all these things now. So maybe in this season of life, this is what I'm going to do. So that is where I think we oftentimes need to step back and decide that, first of all, is this something I even want to do? And then second of all, if it is it something that I'm willing to commit to literally forever in the same way that you would a marriage? And then if it is what you want and you can commit, then is it clearly stated and publicly acknowledged? You wouldn't go into a marriage and not tell anybody. Well, Some people would, but we won't talk about those people. In general, most people would not go into a marriage and not tell anybody. They want to publicly acknowledge it. They're proud of it. They're in love and they want the whole world to know. But there's also a certain level of accountability there. And I'm not going to get into the, dissolutions of marriage and all that, but there is a certain level of accountability by saying, you know what, this is the person that I'm choosing to spend the rest of my life with. Well, in the same way, if there's a habit that we need to bring into our lives and it needs to be habitualized discipline, and we're going to do this forever because this is that important to me. My physical health is this important to me that I'm committing to do this forever. So I start to build through discipline that daily habit that gets me to it. And there's no point in time where I'm not going to do it. Then I need to be willing to also publicly acknowledge it. Because I'm not that person I used to be. I'm now the person that has decided this is what I want. I want to do it forever, and I want the world to know that I am going to do this forever. So I know for me, I found that to be encouraging and a good way to look at the new year as 2023 opens up. So I hope that it was a benefit to you, and I really appreciate you listening to this podcast week after week. And if there's anything else that you want to know about what we have going on, be sure to check out ontheblueline.com. That does it for this week's Morning Roll Call. I'll see you next Thursday in the interview room, but in the meantime, I'm going to see you out there on the Blue Line.